it's just audio or is it video too?
It's video too, yeah. We can disable the video though if you'd like.
I don't mind. It's just looking to see what's in the background.
Normally the video isn't what gets posted. It's just for SEO purposes. It helps rank the page a little bit better. So
Cool.
the majority will just be audio, yeah.
Nice, that's fine.
Sweet. So do you just want to give a little intro to who you are and what you got going on?
Sure. My name's Daniel Klein. I'm the founder of the Perennial Plate, which is an online documentary series. Started about 7 years ago. I was a cook and also a filmmaker, and decided to merge my food, filmmaking, and activism into one project, and just started as a kind of an experiment, trying to make a film a week for a year in Minnesota, where I'm from, about food and eating in the winter. And it just blossomed from there. And all these years later, now we've been traveling around the world and continuing to make films. And we've produced over 160 of them that are all available for free online without advertising to watch. So.
Awesome. So can you take me through a little bit of the progression of what happened? Because it seems like there's been a lot of change in kind of like how you approach different things. So you started out as a cook with a couple more well-known restaurants. How did that end up progressing to film? And then how did you kind of come back full circle and start putting those two things together?
Sure. So I went to NYU, but didn't study film, didn't study cooking. I was a independent study in social movements in Latin America and New York City. So something completely unrelated, except for that it has a social justice component to it. And when I graduated from college, I actually went with my brothers and my cousin to make a feature-length documentary. We traveled from Cairo to Cape Town, across Africa by public transport, and made a film about the failure of food aid in Africa, telling different stories along the way. And it was one of the best experiences of my life, making this film, but also a very long, arduous process of not just the filming was the easy part, and then we edited it for a couple of years and then tried to get the film out for a couple of years too. So the whole thing just took a vast amount of time. And although it did well by documentary standards, I guess, like getting in some festivals and screenings around the country and on some TV, it's still, the audience was really limited to a certain group of people. And it took a lot of time for the yield. And so, and while that was happening, I had some background, a little background in food, because my mom has a bed and breakfast. And I just started cooking at a restaurant in New York. By chance, got a job working for Thomas Keller. And so while I was editing this film about foreign aid, I was working in kitchens and kind of fell in love with cooking. And when we finished the film, I didn't continue with film, I continued with cooking for a number of years. Got to travel and work at different restaurants and do stages at different restaurants. A stage is like a training where you spend anywhere from a week to 6 months working at a place. And I actually got to the point where I was living in New York at the time and wanted to leave New York and move back to Minnesota, where I was born, although I didn't grow up here, and open a restaurant. Thought it'd be cool to move back to where I was from and open something. And I just hit a bunch of walls as far as opening the restaurant. Couldn't get a wine and beer license, kind of began to reconsider things and kind of assess the skill set that I had at 26 years old, and came up with this idea to combine the things that I enjoy doing, which is the food, the activism, and the filmmaking, and kind of the skills that I had around those areas. And I was going to make a pilot for a TV show about eating locally in a place that wasn't like California, a place that was difficult like Minnesota. So the pilot episode was going to be about Thanksgiving. and I started making this, this 23-minute video that was going to be about Thanksgiving turkey, and bought a turkey and raised it in my backyard. And as I thought about the time it would take to get it out onto TV, I started having conversations with people, and it was the early days of web series, and somebody was like, why not try putting this out on the web, And as I looked through the segments that I had for this pilot, it made sense to put them out. Like, they worked as these little packages too. They weren't just like a 23-minute video. So really just started going out and filming stories around Minnesota, and made a crazy commitment of doing one a week. And that's a really great thing. One of my, whenever I talk to like students or anything, I always mention this Ira Glass quote from This American Life about how our, you may have good taste, but your skill set doesn't yet match your taste.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you need to do is practice and create a lot. And that'll help you reach that point of where your skills match your taste. So it was a good way, just making a ton of stuff was a way of like becoming a better filmmaker, becoming a better storyteller. So yeah, that's how it started. I don't know. I've been talking for a while, so maybe you want to point me in a direction.
No, that's awesome. I love it when people end up kind of like going off and just, going into the entire process like that, because it kind of takes us to places that I might not have even known about or asked questions about previously. So then at that point, like, did the activism come from that trip that you had talked about a little bit, or like, how did that side of what you were interested in kind of like come to play in the film and the food side of stuff? Because I think that alone seems like it's one of the driving factors behind a lot of the episodes that you're doing, in that it's related to organic, sustainable stuff, and that's kind of like the connecting thread between a lot of the different episodes.
Yeah, so I mean, college was really where my activism came from. As in high school and all that, charity was a thing. Like, I came from a Catholic family, and I would, I spent like my some of my summers like doing kind of mission-y stuff in like Peru and like doing charity work, and college kind of was the opening up of the world a little more to like the injustices, and that charity is something different altogether, which is why I started to make this film with my brothers and cousin about kind of looking at how the U.S. involvement around the world or not around the world, in Africa, related to like giving and what that really means. And I don't know, I kind of came to a little bit of a conclusion that for myself, I needed to do something that I was passionate about. I think with context of the world. So it doesn't make sense for people just to give while they work in jobs that do commit atrocities, but rather if we're all working passionately at what we love and within the context of how that affects the world, then things would be a little bit better. At least on a personal level, that's what I can do. It's not a lot of point in me working at something that I don't like, So I wanted to find a way of doing what I loved and having it have a positive impact on the world. So I was working in these fancy restaurants, and they're really cool, and I love good food and all that, but it can leave you a little bit empty feeling of just cooking for rich people. And so I was trying to find a way to kind of balance this love of food with a way of having a positive impact on the world. So by telling food stories of real people and getting down to the basics of like why we what we eat, why we eat, who makes it for us, that kind of seemed like a way of doing something that I really enjoyed and having it be adding to the conversation about what it means to be like a responsible citizen in today's world. And then the show kind of evolved. Like it started off a lot more about sustainability and the actual food and like cooking and like what it means to be sustainable. And at the time that had kind of a local focus, you know, eating local. And I'm all for eating local, but I think the show evolved from being this kind of like, this is what you should do to more being about making human connections and kind of presenting content that was both either inspiring or made you feel like you were friends with someone you would never be friends with, which in my opinion lets you see the world a little bit differently. It's like traveling, you know, when you travel, you gain a new perspective. So we're trying to make films that kind of enable people to have a new perspective on an ingredient or on a person or on a way of life, you know?
Cool. So then was there any like one particular instance that kind of pushed you toward that change in how you were presenting the series? Because you went from the year or so in Minnesota and these different episodes as it related to more local stuff like that to branching out more and then eventually going around the full world to tell all these stories. How did you end up kind of coming to that conclusion that you needed to get out and tell these different stories in a different way? Like how did that evolution sort of take place?
I mean, I think a big part of it was that when we were traveling, you know, we did 50 odd episodes in Minnesota and then 50 odd episodes around the US road tripping. My wife, then girlfriend, Mira and I around the country. And cooking was almost always played a role in all of those episodes. There would be a story and then I would cook something. So when we had an opportunity to travel and we started off by going to Japan and China was our first international trip for the series, it became very clear that me cooking had no part in these stories, you know, and that I really didn't have anything to add to these people's stories because they were so rich. And also, who would I have been to teach someone about cooking tofu, you know? So that kind of forced us to just make the stories about other people. And I just kind of thought more and more that other people were more interesting than myself. And, you know, we've had requests for like TV shows about like making like videos, like making a TV show about us making stories about other people. And it just doesn't really seem that interesting. I think that these people, like the people that we are encountering are interesting. And also, you know, my wife is not into food at all. I mean, obviously she eats it and she, you know, likes pizza or whatever. But she was in it for the people. And I think because it became, instead of my project, it became our project. It brought along a lot of the kind of ideas that she wanted to do, which was like telling stories about humans and how we connect. And so her influence there also kind of like changed the show and made it this personal thing as opposed to this food thing. But we held on to the food because it's what has, you know, it can be good to have limitations and good to keep things inside a boundary. And we've made a name for ourselves within the food world. So we do try to use that as a lens for our jumping off point.
Awesome. So then how did you end up like to go from more of the conceptual side to the actual execution, how did you end up actually starting to get a lot of those series done? Like, has it always been just you and your wife creating all the content and doing all the work, or have you brought on other people? And then, like, how did you end up raising the money to get a lot of this done? Because I imagine with a lot of the traveling and just the time it takes to edit a lot of this stuff, that you have to be just pouring resources into these episodes.
So when we started off, it was really low budget, and I did a Kickstarter campaign for the season 1.
Cool.
And then once we saw that was somewhat successful, I decided to go around the US. We did another Kickstarter campaign, and were able to get a bit of sponsorship. So we got sponsored by the National Cooperative Grocers Association. There's a bunch of co-ops around the country, and that they form a group together. It was a very appropriate sponsor for us, because they're all about organic and local food within communities. And and then how the world stuff happened was we were driving home from the trip around the US, and we got a call from a travel company in Australia, Intrepid Travel. And they asked us if we wanted to go to Vietnam just for, I'm sure you've seen things online about like win a trip to like wherever to take pictures of stuff for this company. It's like an advertisement for them,
Yep.
but they give you a free trip. And so that sounded fun for us to go to Vietnam. So we went to Vietnam. We made a little video, and we did charge them the cost of our editing. But we made a video, and it kind of went viral. It's like just a montage of food in Vietnam. And so we saw an opportunity there, and then we went back to them and said, hey, people are obviously receptive to this kind of like food montage thing. We do a series that's also like documentaries. And the reason people travel, according to us, is because oftentimes what they eat, and also the people that they meet, kind of the personal connections that they make. That's what they remember. That's what they enjoy. So why don't we partner on doing a series of films around the world? And we will do one for each place we visit. We'll do one video that can go viral, and then we'll make 2 to 4 videos that are kind of more what we're about, which is kind of these people stories. And we were like, let's start off with, maybe we can start with 6 countries. And they were like, great, why don't we go to 12 countries? And so that happened. It was sort of a miracle. And they were an incredible company to work for. Really had lots of support, but no input into what we created. They loved and were behind everything that we did, which was incredible. So from there, then it was kind of, we had a baby. We had a son who's almost 2 now, and we realized that we couldn't be like traveling that much with the baby in the same way, going from hotel to hotel. So we then decided or thought of a concept to go spend like a season in a place, like a summer, fall, spring, winter, and really get to know a place better. And we presented that idea to various tourism boards, kind of giving an opportunity to share the agricultural and culinary background of a place in a much more in-depth way than any kind of TV show or most things are capable of doing, by making 10 films in a location. So, and that would enable us to do an Airbnb and stay in a place with our kid and not be jumping around, but also continue to tell stories. So it's kind of just a nice adaptation of what we were already doing, kind of a progression that keeps in mind our kid. And we have up until we finished our world travels, it was just Mira and I, and we filmed and edited everything. And then we made a show for PBS, and I hired a couple people to help me edit that. And one of the editors was a fantastic editor, and so we kept him on. And they're all good editors, but we really liked the work that this one editor did, so we kept him around. And he's become a real part of the team, and he went to Colorado with us, which was our last location, and to Ireland with us. And he does a huge amount of the work.
Awesome.
Well. Yeah.
So it sounds like you guys really had a knack for how you were presenting your idea to get the specific things done that you needed to get done. Did either one of you have any sort of marketing background, or like, just because it seems like the business side of what you're doing, it seems like you've just really done that organically, and it seems like you just kind of get it. Was there any sort of training or learning or anything involved in that side of things?
Mira did work for a marketing company in New York, but I think it has been a really organic process, kind of seeing what and just following kind of what would work and trying things out. You know, we've also had stuff that hasn't panned out, and for everything that does work, you know, we tried a lot of different ways of making it happen, and these are the ones that kind of came through. And we've learned along the way that, especially with kind of being an independent filmmaker, that you have to have several things in the works at the same time. If you just concentrated on one thing, it's very easy to like have that fall through, and then you're kind of left with nothing. So we now, you know, we have these series and successes that are happening, but it's because we're working on several things, trying to make several things happen, that one thing does happen. But I think we've had a lot of, we've been very lucky, and it's been a great, we came into this world at the right time, at the early stages of web series, when food has become such a huge thing. So it's kind of a good merger of those two, you know, and it's changed so much since we started. The amount of video content now compared to when we began is totally changed. And I don't know if the show would have had any success if we were to start it now, because there's too much out there to compete with, you know?
Yeah, and it seems like there's been a lot of things, just from the couple of points that you've mentioned, it seems like there's been a lot of things that have kind of like worked you into where you are now, as almost like a couple different serendipitous, you know, this happened and then this worked, and then, you know, like this didn't, so it moved us this way. How much of that was kind of you planning it, and how much of it was on accident? Because I feel like whenever you end up doing your own personal projects, there's always half of it that's just you busting your ass, and the other half is just these random occurrences that happen that kind of, you know, help you along the way.
Yeah, I don't know the percentage of which is which, but I do know that a lot of it is going with what becomes possible. I spent, when our son was born, I spent a long time working on a pilot for another TV show, which we haven't been able to sell. And even though we had buyers that wanted to, and then fell through. And because of that process, that woke us up to the idea of doing this, spending a season in a place. So it's definitely been like we try things and follow the things that work. We do keep it ourselves pretty locked in as far as making sure it's something that we feel good about doing. You know, we've had some offers to do advertisements for like fast food companies, you know, and things like that. And so there is an opportunity to go down various ways, but I think we try to remind ourselves of like why we're creating this show. Like, what's the point of doing it? And the point is always comes back to like the value of the stories and also the value for ourselves. Like, do we enjoy doing this work? Is that a job that we want to do? Do we want to be running around stressed, making money for something we don't believe in, or do we want to make a little less money but get to spend 2 months in Ireland with our son? So it's a combination of the opportunities that present themselves and then how they fit into the kind of the type of life that we want to live.
And then you also mentioned that a lot of the space in general has changed since you started. What kinds of things have you seen as far as trends or things that are, a lot different than when you started initially doing a lot of these stories or just being in the food world in general?
I mean, I think that less of the food world changing. It's more been like the video world that I've seen change. I mean, the food continues to grow and be more and more and more popular, which I find like I don't love the food world. I love the stories of the people that we tell, and we've seen, and it existed back then, but kind of the rock star celebritification of chefs and everything like that, which, seems like it could be a stepping stone towards the apocalypse, but, so, there's this trend towards like local food and all that, and that's kind of subsided a little bit. I don't think it became fully realized, like the way that we really need to be like looking at where our food comes from. It's more just like, as long as you have a couple things on your menu that are local, then like you're in the clear or something like that. So I don't know if that conversation is really like going forward in the way that it should. But as far as video is concerned, there's just so much of it. And, Facebook is so huge. We used to get the majority of our views on Vimeo, and now we get definitely the majority of our views on Facebook, even with a lot of them being these kind of three or 10-second views that people automatically plays, even taking into account that that's like 90% of the views, you still get such a huge and engaged audience on Facebook that it's kind of crazy. So that's a big change. When we started, Facebook was just kind of a way of getting people to our website. Now Facebook is like its own thing for video.
That's weird that you mentioned that too, because it seems like for a lot of other marketing related stuff that Facebook is kind of dying and it's become this pay to play type of platform. But it's interesting to me that it almost seems like, because there's such a human element to the stories that you're telling, that's almost the reason why Facebook is doing better as a platform or a medium to share your message than some other spot that you might be able to put it out. Is that kind of like how you see it, or how have you seen that change as you've produced more stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different avenues to watch video on that getting a lot of views on any of them is really difficult. But Facebook is a place where all of those people that go to YouTube and Vimeo and Netflix and Amazon Prime and everything also all go to Facebook. So there is just that quantity of people that are there and are able to share videos so easily. So you're able to, with a video, get it out to the right people, and then it enters into their world, that it's not Perennial Plate's world. Like we have our 50,000 fans or whatever, fans, people online, but if you, Facebook does enable you to sometimes tap into other pockets of people, and that's cool to see. I haven't quite figured that out, and I don't think anybody has. But and it is partially pay to play. Like we on Facebook put like small chunks, like $50 behind a video, and kind of direct it in areas that we think people might be interested in it. And at first I was pretty kind of opposed to that. But then I realized like we spent money to fly to a place. We spent money on music. We spent money on editors and time, lots and lots of time to create this thing. Does it make sense to like hold on to like not give it its best chance by using some marketing to like get it out online, when this is like a message that I want a lot of people to get, so like even if Facebook does, if you put $50 behind something, it does help it do better because it gets it to the audience that you want it to get to. And it's kind of, maybe it's messed up, I don't know, but like it's worth it because we value the message that we're sharing, and it's not, there's no money that we're making off of getting more views. It's just getting a message to more people,
Yeah, that side of things is interesting to me too, because I think there's a lot of people that they start doing some sort of like artistic endeavor, and then when they get to the intersection of that and commerce, and when it turns into this thing of like, okay, this is going to the space of I can actually make a living doing this, or start to make a living doing this, you start to get into all these like moral dilemmas where you're like, okay, now we're advertising in this way. Is that congruent with the message that we're trying to send out? And you just end up in this totally different world. And I think you had kind of touched on it a little bit too, with like that comment that you had made a little bit ago with you weren't necessarily super into the food world. And I'm a very similar way, where I'm a graphic designer and I'm not into the design world at all. I think there's a lot of people that, have their heads in the wrong place and worry about the wrong things. But I think you get to a point where you almost end up using that as a tool to do something else. Was there an area or a point in your life where you kind of recognize like food might not be the main thing that I'm doing or focused on anymore? It might just be a piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the international travel and meeting the people that we have had the opportunity to become friends with, that definitely became clear. I mean, Mira is constantly encouraging us to make stuff that is outside of food. But I still think that there is a benefit with it to giving yourself some limitations. One of my favorite movies is The Five Obstructions. It's by Lars von Trier. It's like a documentary where he has his favorite director make 5 films with some rules around them. Like you can only use like 6 frames at a time, and it has to be in Cuba, or then it's like you have to film this in the most horrible place in the world, but you can't show the most horrible place in the world. And he makes all these movies, short little films, and they're incredible. Like the first 4 films are just incredible. And then the 5th film, he's able to do whatever he wants. And the 5th film kind of sucks. So limitations are like can be a real way of causing creativity. And they also are able, it's good for telling your story to be within something that people can kind of understand a little bit. So I would like to do films about other things. But I think for the Perennial Plate series itself, as it stands, it's probably best to at least keep it somewhat within that realm,
Makes sense. And then how do you guys end up going about finding these stories? Because I think that is almost one of the most labor-intensive parts of the process. that there can be, and it's something that you don't necessarily see because it doesn't end up in the actual visual storytelling itself. It's like this whole planning behind making that little piece happen. How do you go from, like the Beyond the Break one in Ireland to these different places, and how do you kind of like manage the time that you need to both tell the story the right way, but also find the stories that you want to tell?
Yeah, I mean, the research aspect is huge. Before we go to a place, we spend a lot of time on the internet. Um, we usually come up with a list of ideas that are things that we are personally interested in. Things that we know about a place that we would like to learn about, and stories that we think would be both interesting in the story, but also visually. We're constantly thinking about how, like, that's cool to talk about, but what does it look like? Because at the end of the day, with filmmaking, it's not like writing a story or even a podcast where when you talk about history, it's the same as talking about the present. They have the same power no matter which way you tell a story. With video, you have to have something that happened in order to share it, well. And then we are also always thinking about the video within the context of like everything that we've made before, and trying to not be repetitive and continue to be creative and do things that are both going to be interesting to our audience as well as interesting for ourselves and something different. But after the Google searches and the, looking up about the cuisine or the agriculture of a place, we also try to find local cooks or chefs or blogs and things like that, and kind of ask people on those for ideas, because we worked with the travel agency, or not travel agency, travel company, and also tourism boards. They have a huge amount of knowledge, so we tap into that. And then inevitably, when we get to a place, we meet a lot of people and continue to get lots of suggestions. And if we're missing certain areas, and we ask for ideas. So that surfing story came from, there's a restaurant in Dublin called the Fumbly, and they have used Perennial Plate in some of their training, some of our videos. And so we reached out to them, or they reached out to us, and they heard we were coming, and they gave us some story ideas, but they didn't really, I don't know if we followed through with any of them, but we had something fall through when we were in Dublin. And so we changed and went with this story that this woman, Ash, who runs the Fumbly, suggested. And it was so fantastic, the story, that I was like, okay, what else should we do? Because it was clearly someone who really got what we were trying to do.
Yep.
And so she was like, if you have a chance, you should really go film with these surfers. What they're doing is very cool. So I was like, all right, sold.
And then how do you guys end up, like, how have you changed since you've gone to film and tell a lot of these stories? Because I think even within just, let's say the surfing one, I'm sure there's things that you took out of that you might not have, had as a knowledge base before. With doing how many episodes that you guys have done, how, like, has there been any points related to like an aha moment, or things that you've learned, or stuff like that you have gotten out of the stories that you might not have gotten if you hadn't told them in the first place?
Yeah, there's a couple things. Obviously, personally, there are some huge things that we've gotten out of it, as far as like the people that we become friends with are usually the ones we wouldn't expect to be, like maybe you'd think we'd be friends with someone that we had more in common with, but it's like the religious family in Ohio, or the, Hicks in Mississippi that we get along with really well and kept in contact with, or the udon farmer in Japan. So that's really cool. It's kind of the way that you don't really know who you're going to be friends with, and that they don't necessarily always share political or moral ideas, but yet there is a bond there. And then also, just one example of something that I really was inspired by and learned. We went to this restaurant in Oaxaca called Itanoni, and there the proprietor talked a lot about how you can't really like compartmentalize or like scientifically analyze the power of food, and that our culture kind of wants to put, say, like corn is corn, whether it's GMO or a corn that has been passed through history for 5,000 years, and I think I loved personally the idea that like that's not true. That like this corn that is the same corn that has been passed down from generation to generation to generation from Mayan kings has blood, sweat, tears, passion, love, all of the things into it. And when you eat that, that is different than something that was created in a lab, and that it can't be scientifically proven, but it's like why we're human, So when I heard that really inspired me and changed the way I think about food and kind of the value of two different ingredients, that one costs 5 cents and one costs $5, but they're not the same.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then has there been any similarities like that between people across the world that are in the way that they handle or look at food, or like what kinds of patterns have you seen just in coming in contact with so many different kinds of people and different ways of doing things?
I think there are similarities in that everybody does want good food for their families, like this concept of people wanting like that people don't care. I think people do care, like if someone has the choice between a beautiful ingredient and a poor one, they want delicious, organic, whatever that may mean to you, food for their families. So that is a common thread, but I think different cultures really do have different ideas about food. The rich history that corn was passed down is not the same as kind of like this matter of fact tradition maybe that exists in Ireland. So I think there is the culture of a place really impacts the way that they look at their food, and they're definitely, they all value it, but it's not all the same.
And then do you try and when you approach a story, how much are you trying to kind of weave in like the activist side of yourself that might see things a little bit differently, and how much are you trying to just show exactly what's going on? Because I'm sure there's some stories that you end up telling where there's something that you might not agree with in the process, or like the way that they're handling some sort of things. How often does that happen, and how do you kind of wrestle with that creatively?
That's a good question. We don't want anyone to look bad. Kind of make a conscious effort to have generally positive stories that are inspiring. And I do feel like even if someone has some negative aspects to them, that there is like a beautiful story to be told from what they have to say. That being said, we have chosen not to put out videos because we think the person is bad. Or, I mean, they just don't, there's not enough. We weren't able to capture in the short time that we had the necessary stuff to really tell their story in a real way. But we do very much try to tell the story that the person has to tell. And or what we see as like the best story that that person had to tell within the time period that we were there, you know? So we try to get that out in it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like the activist side will come out in the fact that you will hopefully see them as like a complete human, you know? And so even if it doesn't have this like over the head message of sustainability, like a human-based economy is sustainability. So any story that like bridges that connection is going to have that power and that activism behind it. Like being human and not just commercial is like a piece of activism in my opinion. So the best example in one of our favorite films, maybe our favorite films that we've made of all of them, was in Sri Lanka. We went to this small organic tea farm and expecting to make a film about organic tea. And the people just weren't that passionate about the tea. They're farmers and they had been doing it for years, and they had changed to being organic 10 years ago or something like that. And they had some things to say about it, but it clearly wasn't like what they were farmers is what they did, you know? Mm-hmm. But we noticed that they were a very sweet couple. So to try to get more information out of them, we just started asking about like how they met. And even though it was in a different language, we began to like see that there was really a lot of laughter and smiles and looks, and the translation that we were getting kind of alluded to this sweet story. Translation can be really difficult in the field, especially we usually don't work with professional translators. We work with people that we find. But it ended up being that the film, although picking tea is the backdrop and the visual element, it's very much like a love story, and tea never gets mentioned in the film. And there was a moment when Mira was editing it, we were looking at it, and it had this section in the middle about the tea and organic and blah, blah, blah. And when we took it out, suddenly it was this beautiful film, you know, which had nothing to do with tea, but everything to do with it. So that's kind of like the prime example. So that one's called Tea for Two if you get a chance. It's very sweet. Awesome. But it also, I mean, it makes you think, like, if you go to the store to buy tea and you knew something about organic tea, that might convince you. But when you fall in love with these people who are missing teeth and fell in love through an arranged marriage, that's what you're going to think about. And you're not going to think the same about like someone picking tea. You're going to personally know somebody who picks tea. So.
Nice. So is that like when you go into trying to create one of these stories, how much of it is kind of winging it, and how much of it is coming in with a broader sense of what the actual story is, and then just trying to get the pieces of it? Because I'm assuming there's some that you go into and it's pretty straightforward just based on what you're getting, but then there's some, like the tea one that you had mentioned, where you go in and it's just something totally different than what you thought it was. Like, how do you try and keep what you had mentioned before with keeping constraints on stuff when there might be some sort of other story going on that might not be as appropriate in the context of sustainability or food?
Yeah, we try to have a good gauge of what is possible. So you might see like a story that is just too complex to tell, you know, and it's based on our time, you know, like not only the time that we put, like generally the films we put out are kind of shorter, regardless of that, like to get that out of a person over the 2 or 3 days that we film with them might be very difficult or require a lot of extra filming. So we keep that context. But generally, we have an idea going in. We think that like this will be a cool story because of this, you know, because of this element, and let's see if we can follow down that path. But like the tea story, it frequently doesn't happen that way, and so we're very open to the way it presents itself to us. We're always willing to change, and a lot of it happens also in the editing room. Sometimes you go to a story and you're not really sure what it is, so you just ask a lot of questions and like keep the conversations going and try to get some personal answers, get a general overview of everything they do. Kind of can check off some boxes as far as like things that you know you would need for a story that is simple. And then hopefully in the editing room, you're able to get some inspiration and take something that from a simple story to something really beautiful. And that can mean even like, you know, an example, like we'll have filmed a whole story with somebody over 3 days, and what we'll end up using is like one quote over like beautiful imagery or something, you know, like we try to salvage and kind of make the spirit of something, because maybe the way that person talked didn't really work well, like face to face, but when you hear their words on their own with imagery, it does work, you know? Yeah. So our goal is to release a great film, and you have to not be attached to the content that you filmed and be ready to like shift it to really the best thing that is available, you know?
Yep. So then what has the goal been as of lately for the web series? Because obviously you're putting it out online and you're hoping that all these people see it. What do you hope somebody gets out of those episodes as they're watching? Like, I guess, what is your purpose behind creating all of this stuff as it changes? Because I'm assuming you kind of have to wrestle with that too, as things start to kind of mold and shift into different places, and you know, as Perennial Plate might become, you know, one portion of some other film stuff that you get into.
So, well, I mean, first off, like, it's always important for us to, like, irregardless of the content, to try to enjoy the process. Getting to do what we do is a huge part of it. So getting to go to Ireland, getting to be creative and having the chance to like hear someone's story that you would never get to hear are all huge benefits to us personally. So even before a video is released or seen or not seen by very many people, hopefully we've already hopefully it's already good, you know, because we've gotten a lot out of it already. And people sharing, sometimes people like to share their stories too. So it's nice to like really listen to somebody and get to hear why they do something or what their history is. So I think there's some value in that. And then, you know, for a while I was making like shorter versions of all the videos that we were making, and for Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. And I think after this election and after all of the catering to the internet and making things fit for the internet, I think we're kind of stopping that as like to say, no, we're going to just put out the full film, you know. This exists the way it is, and we want to be promoting things that have like real value, you know, instead of just something to get views on the internet. So that is the next thing. And then obviously the two main goals of the show is for people to think differently about their food. We're not telling people what exactly to think. Obviously we lean in the direction towards you know, supporting families and small farmers and things like that, but really just having that dialogue occur about getting good food And then also the human connection is like the dialogue about global economies and food can't so often exists without discussion of the people who grow that food. So by telling stories about humans, that's the other main thing. So as long as, for the time being, as we're getting out those things and getting to continue to be creative, that, you know, that's what we want. What means creative, what is fulfilling creatively for us continues to change. So we don't want to be releasing the same kind of movie over and over. Like a film that would have been satisfying to us now is very different than one that would have been satisfying to us a few years ago, because we're continuing to grow and develop and change. So we want each one to kind of be better, or at least be challenging and different in a new way. So.
And how did you end up taking the stance of being kind of more of a broader stance to how all of these individuals look at food or their relationships, versus, I think, when you first start to see some sort of like injustice somewhere, or something that you think is not necessarily going the right way or being done the right way, I think your initial inclination is to start shouting about it and saying that it's wrong. Was there any sort of conscious effort at some point to say, we're just going to tell these people's stories and kind of let the viewers explore what those different things mean, versus trying to really shout like a specific message at them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's plenty of people shouting messages, and there's been great films about food, like Food Inc. and stuff like that, that really do that extremely well and lay out those arguments. And I think everyone learns in like a different way, and everyone like makes their decisions in a different way. Some people make a shift because they learn an informational thing. Some people need a subtle like story to guide them in a direction. So I think if different filmmakers and different people are kind of making the kind of things that work for them, that they're happy to tell, the way they're happy to tell a story, then they'll hopefully get to the right audiences. So the films that I'm making aren't going to work for everybody, but if they work for, if they do work for somebody, then it's great. And that tends to be the way that I would rather be. I don't want stuff shoved down my throat. So I'd rather it be a beautiful, subtle way of sharing a story instead of telling,
Cool. Yeah, definitely. And then
I gotta be heading out though, so.
No worries. Is there anything that you would tell somebody that's kind of trying to follow a similar path as to what you've done, to guide them in the right direction, or, help them through some sort of pitfall that you might have ended up in that you weren't really able to see coming into it?
I mean, I just went to my cousin is a teacher, and he had me do career day yesterday at his high school. So I was just telling kids, like, first to start is such a huge thing. And to make a commitment for me is a huge thing. Like, if we didn't commit to putting out videos currently every 2 weeks, like, I'd never get one done, So so knowing yourself and knowing how you work is helpful, but also just beginning and making a commitment to getting something done, even if it's imperfect, is huge. And then getting the practice, like I said before, about reaching your taste, and then also, which I'm certainly not at yet, but getting a lot of practice at it. And then, like, it depends on how old you are. Like, having all your eggs in one basket, like I mentioned before, was certainly fine as a 26-year-old, but now in my 30s with a kid, then there's something that has become involved, which is both meeting creative and financial needs. So it's it's a constant challenge, but it's an enjoyable one.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. We'll have to do another one of these in the future. Is there any small little tidbits you could give us to what might be coming up for Perennial Plate?
So we just released our second of 10 films in Ireland. So those will be coming out over the next few months. And then we are still not sure of the dates, but we're most likely going to Mexico City in mid-February probably. So a lot of going to be content coming for quite some time.
Awesome. Well, if I can share any of that on my channels, be sure to drop me a line.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Awesome, man. Appreciate you taking the time. Have a great
Yeah,
rest
nice
of your day.
chatting with you. Nice to meet you. I'll talk to you soon.
Cool. Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye.